take it away.
All right. Thank you, Mark. All right, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here. Thank you to Phoenixville Library and to Mark for inviting me to talk about something that I'm passionate about, which is composting. And thank you to everyone who is on here and in the room tonight to participate and learn about how to compost in your backyard. I've been doing this since 2016. I started actually in my backyard, composting and just, learning to get the ratios right. And just like a lot of you, might have these issues, I didn't have the right ratios, I was putting maybe the wrong things. So I wanted to be able to help others compost without having to compost in their yard. So I started a business called Back to Earth Compost Crew, and I'm passionate about being sustainable. And when I had my children, I realized that I wanted to leave the world a better place for them and for their kids. So I started helping other people compost, whether it be through our curbside compost pickup service. We also have compost collection sites where folks bring their food scraps directly to us. And we do a lot of workshops, and we're in the community. We also work with businesses to be sustainable. So it's a couple here in Phoenixville. And so I really just want to spread the word about how important it is and why we should be composting. So just a little bit about my company, Back to Earth Compost Crew. In fact, when I was young, we started recycling. So I kind of got into the groove of being the person in the family to be the, person to tell everyone what goes in the recycling bin. And then in high school, I was part of a group called Save the Environment Man. Sorry, this isn't moving. Which I love to see these groups now in schools, and students being just interested in being more sustainable. I sold real estate for a number of years. I had my children, and then I kind of dived into doing composting, and that's what I do now. We have Back to Earth Compost Crew, where we have 8 routes and 5 compost collection sites, and then we do a lot of workshops. So, and the reason why I was so kind of passionate about doing this is 40% of food ends up in the landfill, and it's staggering. It's, this shouldn't be happening. It's really something that we have control over, and we can do it in our backyard. So this is something that we can do to keep this out of the landfills and incinerators, and create something that's beneficial for our soil. So, food scraps, organic waste, paper, yard trimmings, wood waste can go into your compost pile, keeping it out of the landfills. And if you're here, you probably know these stats if you're interested in composting, but I do like to share, and it is kind of mind-blowing to know that it's still happening, that stuff is going into the landfill and incinerators. So kind of a definition of what compost is. What are you going to be creating in your backyard, or on your deck or patio, because you don't actually have to have a yard to be able to compost. And so composting is aerobic decomposition of organic materials. So it needs oxygen. So we'll talk about that in a little bit when we go through the 5 easy steps, but keep in mind that, it's something that needs oxygen to break down. So it's transferring these raw materials, such as leaves, grass clippings, your food scraps, into this valuable soil conditioner. So it's added to your soil. So you don't have to use pesticides or fertilizers or you don't have to water your garden as much because it actually absorbs moisture, absorbs water. It actually improves the composition of soil. So there's so many different benefits. Besides just keeping it out of the landfill, it actually is what you're creating is so beneficial and so needed for our soil. And so it's a win-win. You can use the finished product, as we were talking about earlier, in your garden. So you're making this finished product, and what are you going to do with it? And we'll talk about how you can use it in your garden. And feel free, like I said, feel free to ask questions. That's the one thing I also want to mention. Ask questions as we go. Feel free to put it in the chat. Mark said he would read those to me. Or just unmute yourself and ask, because any question is valid. Just we're all learning. And the main thing about composting that blew my mind was that we can actually protect our climate. That is just invaluable information. We apply it to the land, we apply it to the gardens and farms, and it sequesters carbon, which is so needed. And I just imagine if everyone around the earth composted, and we're working on it. There's so many different companies and people that are doing this, and so it is really a movement. So you're part of a movement when you're doing this. So share it with your neighbors, share it with your family, and sharing is important, because what if you have a compost and your neighbor doesn't? They have a garden, you don't, so you can share their compost with them, they can share their harvest with you. It's a beautiful thing. It builds community, which I love. Community compost, super, super important. Keeping it local, like you're keeping it in your yard, you're keeping it somewhere where you can use. So we actually, when we take our stuff to be composted with Back to Earth Compost Crew, we take it to a farm, which isn't that far away, and they process it. And I'm happy, and we give back finished compost to our composters so that they can use it in their garden if they're not creating it on their own. So definitely look at it as something that's super valuable that you can use in your garden to add nutrients to your soil. All right, so we're going to break down, no pun intended, the 5 easy steps. So if you are taking notes, you can use this. Grab my water, and we'll go through each one. I have slides for each one, and pictures. I feel like they're helpful. To me, when I first started, I realized that I'm a visual person. I need to see these things. So, that's kind of why I put this together this way. I needed to know, like, where was I going to put my composter, and how was I going to put stuff in there, and, what do I need to do with it? How do I need to, work with it to make it finished compost? So the first thing is location and bin type. Second is adding your food scraps and your brown material. Turning it, we talked about how it's aerobic, so you need oxygen. Your compost is living. There is more microbes in a teaspoon, I think it's a teaspoon of compost, than there are people on the planet. It's amazing, it's alive. So in order to keep it alive though, you need to add, it needs oxygen. So if you get a tumbler, we'll talk about this, like there's holes in it, and so that there are holes for a reason. Water, super important. In fact, I was talking to someone earlier today about it, and they're like, it's like us. Like, we need air, we need water, movement, and adding your foods, obviously, like the food. So, and then the end result, like once you create this, what do you do with it? So we'll talk about that too. Any questions here? Am I moving too fast? Good? All right, step 1, your location. I have this photo here because it's, it's a garden, it's a section of the lawn. Where could you put your composter there? You know, you could put it next to the flowers, to the right of the flower. You could disguise it if you have a manicured lawn, putting it somewhere where kind of only you know where it is. You know, but the main thing I say is find a convenient spot. I just helped someone put their composter out in their yard today, and we talked about, she had a big yard. Where will you take it in the wintertime, right? Like, it's cold, it's snowing, do you want to go all the way to the back? No. There was a spot under a tree near a shed, so that worked out perfectly, and it wasn't too far from the back door. So, and you'll use it if it's convenient. If it's not, chances are maybe you'll get away from using it just because it's not convenient. So, and if you don't have a yard, you can still compost. There's something called a tumbler, and I'll show you some pictures in a minute. Those are great, even if you do have a yard. And you can just put that on a concrete slab, or you can put it on the grass, and easy to use. There's also a couple different other ways to compost besides, or not what we're going to talk about here, but if you want to look it up, something called bokashi, and then there's some vermicomposting. Those are a couple different other ways to compost. Or also trench composting, where you just dig a hole and put your food scraps in there, like my grandmother did, and they'll break down. But if you want to create finished compost to add into your garden, this is a way to do it. Or if you have a lot of food scraps. So find a spot that's convenient and not too much sun. If you do have sun in your entire yard, that's okay too. You can cover it. You can get a tumbler. You can cover it with a tarp if you need to. But there's ways to get around that. The other thing is easy access to water. And that's super important. I'll talk about that shortly. That's one of the steps. But think about where you're going to put this and how easy you can get to water. Maybe you use a watering can or a bucket if you don't have a spigot nearby. But you will probably need water. Actually, we were just talking about that earlier. More than you might think. All right, any questions? We're going to move on to some pictures of the composters, types of bins. All right, so we'll start on the left, and that's a tumbler. That is a one bin tumbler, and I should say I'm going to get another picture of a tumbler with 2 openings. Does yours have 2 openings?
No, okay, just one.
Got it. So I'll come back to that. So if you have a small space or a deck or patio, you can use the tumbler. Just make sure you put something underneath of it. There are holes in it, so there'll be some liquid coming out. Middle is something that you can make out of pallets. That is, if you have a lot of leaves, if you have a lot of grass, a lot of food scraps, you want to make a lot of compost and have a big garden, that's something that you could do by moving the food scraps, moving the compost from one to the next, if you have a lot. And then the one on the right, the top, I call the stealth composter, just because it is small and it can fit kind of in a landscaped yard. I have used them, and they're not so easy to turn. I've talked to a lot of other folks about this. They look nice, but they're just not so easy to turn when you get in there and use your pitchfork to kind of turn, which you need to do. If you don't do it, it'll still break down, it'll take longer. So, if you want to make compost that you can use in your garden, you want to turn it. Bottom right, that's a nice, open composter made out of, chicken wire and 2x4s. So, something that's easily constructed for, minimal amount. If you have a lot of leaves in your yard, that's a great one too. There's also another one. I'm going to go back to the tumbler. So when you're using a tumbler, at some point you're going to have to stop adding food scraps and let it like finish. So for a couple weeks. If you have a tumbler that has 2 openings, you can stop the one side and add to the other side. So you're and then finish the one, take it out, start that one over, and kind of go back and forth. That's kind of why I said either two tumblers or a tumbler that has 2 openings. So just keep that in mind. And they're usually $100 to $200. The next one is a GeoBin. This one I've done a lot of workshops and we use these. These are $38. They weigh 7 pounds and they come in this slim box. So if you have it delivered, you can actually compost the box. So it is plastic. It's very durable plastic with air holes, obviously, and it can expand to as much as holding, I think, 240 gallons worth, which is pretty big. So, and like I said, it's an affordable solution. So we've been doing composting for a community garden, and we have 2 of those in there, and they've held up through the winter. So I think that, and I'm happy with them, using them personally. So that's another option. Any questions so far on the different composters?
How's the GeoBin for turning? Is it difficult to turn, or is it pretty easy to just kind of scoop down in?
It's pretty easy. It's not that high, so it's and it's like for me, like easy to get in with the pitchfork.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've seen videos of trash cans where you drill holes in them and they have a locked lid.
Yes.
Using that as a composter, would that work?
Yes. I've heard folks doing that. I do hear that once you put so much in there, it gets really heavy to turn. So just keep that in mind. Like, keep in mind how much you're putting in.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, that's one way to do it. It's a homemade tumbler. But just make sure you have air holes.
Right, they had drilled holes all over in the bottom and on the sides, and I guess even on the top, and then a locked lid they said to use in this video.
Okay.
So that when you go to roll it, they were talking about rolling it.
Yes.
But I guess maybe you couldn't fill it all the way, you would have to fill it halfway.
It'll get heavy. We have those for some of our commercial composters, those kind of trash cans. They do get really heavy, so it's tough to roll it after they get heavy. So maybe get a couple of them and start with one and kind of see how much you can add to it before you can't, it gets hard to push, and then stop adding. You will have to stop adding at some point anyway, but I'll tell you what, is this Carol?
Yes.
Okay, once you start composting, it's so hard not to. Like, once you start, have you composted before?
Not really that much. I have a place in the back of my house with, say, cinder blocks all around it, and I would throw a lot of scraps in there.
Nice.
But it wasn't, I don't know, it seemed like it got filled up with peppermint plants, and now it's got a lot of roots in it.
They do take over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like, once you start composting, it's hard to stop putting your food scraps in a composter. It's like you don't want to put them in the trash. So having like a second compost bin or a backup, is super helpful, because if you do, especially if you do a lot of cooking or you eat a lot of produce, definitely have a kind of a big enough container. You'll see once you get into the groove of how much you're putting in there. And I always say start small, and we'll talk about when you put it in there, but if this is the first time you're composting, in fact today I was helping someone and we just did a small container, like it was maybe 10, 12 ounces, maybe a little bit bigger, but that was it. We put soil in first to kind of inoculate it, And then we put the food scraps in there and she put cardboard on top. That was it. So I always say, like, start with a little bit. You don't have to put all of your scraps from the whole week of cooking, but just start with a little bit, and you'll feel good about watching it break down, and then you'll start adding more from there. Get confident with it, because I know you can all do it. Like, you can do this. That's kind of the one thing I want you to walk away with. You can go home and start today, really, to do this. It's just, following kind of the recipe. We're all chefs here. We're making compost. But we'll all have a different recipe, right? We're all cooking different things at home. We'll all have different scraps to put in there. So it's not going to be, like, there's no exact way to do it. I mean, there's a way to do it, but everyone's going to be different. So everyone's going to have, you might have something drier, some food's wetter. You just have to, kind of go with it and realize, like, it's an experiment, and then you'll get the hang of it, and you'll realize what your ratios really need to be for getting the right moisture level, if that makes sense. But thanks, Carol. Great question. So step 2, we're moving along. This is adding your greens and browns. So talking about your green and your brown waste. So the green waste is your nitrogen, and your brown waste is your carbon. I always got that, mixed up. You have a question?
No, I just noticed your wine corks are compostable.
They are.
I didn't know that.
They take a while. If you have the ability to, like, chop them up, the wine corks. Marianne was asking about wine corks. They will be in there for a while if you don't chop them up. So they can go in there if they're natural. Excuse me, the same thing with, like, tea bags, but a lot of tea bags these days are synthetic. They're made with plastic, so you don't want to put those in there. The other thing is, this is your compost. If you're not sure, you can always try it in there, right? And try, like, I was talking to someone the other day about a Pella case, because they're compostable. I guess some of them are. And so if it's that big, I'd say, like, cut it up and put it in there. This is, you can experiment with it to see. You'll see if it's still in there in a month, 2 months, or when you go to use it, if the pieces are still in there. Look on the websites of the places that you want to use their products in your compost. Most ink these days, they're soy-based, so if you're worried about, like, paper with ink on it, but you can put, paper in there just as long as it's not coated. So I'm going to start with the green waste. Like, you'd wetter, those are your fruits and veggies. I always say, if it grows, it goes. I have some handouts here with the information, like a list, and here it is. This is actually on our website, and everything that's on our website, back to earthcompost.com, you can put in your backyard comp. So if you ever forget, or I'll send you the PDF, and it's on the cheat sheet. If you forget, you can always go to our website and look it up and, see from there the list. Fruits, veggies, eggshells. Now, we can take them without being rinsed in our curbside pickup, but I would tell you to rinse your eggshells, and crush them before you put them in your backyard composter. Tea bags, as long as they're not plastic, and take off the staple. That will compost. Your coffee grounds and your coffee filters. I know that some of the coffee companies now have little pods that say they're compostable. Try them out. You can try it and see, but bread, cereal, pasta, rice, and nuts, I kind of say hold off on that until you get the hang of doing the stuff that's going to, fruits and veggies that are going to kind of break down pretty quickly. And I'm going to reiterate this again, but chop them up small. You want to make sure that they're chopped up not only for the smell, but reducing odors, but also animals. If they're small, then it's better. It's better that they shouldn't attract. You shouldn't be attracting animals. I know someone who actually uses an immersion blender to put their food scraps and water, and then pours that on their compost. That's one way to do it. Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, so a little tip, seems to work for her. She also sometimes will just put it in her flower bed. But again, that's a way to kind of break it down, because the smaller pieces, they'll break down quicker. Brown waste is your dryer waste. Not your clothes dryer, but actually you can put lint in there as long as it's from cotton, linen, or hemp. I wouldn't put any other, I know those the other clothes don't produce a lot of lint, but you don't want to put synthetics in your composter. But something I don't have on here is leaves. I have pictures of it, but not listed. Need to update that. Leaves, leaves, leaves. So save your leaves in the fall so that you can have them all year long in your composter, to put in your composter. Shredded newspaper. Small pieces of cardboard. If you get deliveries and they're in cardboard boxes that aren't coated, those are great for your composter. The wine corks that we talked about, make sure that you kind of break those up. Tissue paper, paper towels, and napkins. Even the cardboard tubes from those, all compostable. But what I wouldn't put in there in your backyard compost is meat, poultry, fish, dairy products, or grease of any kind. It will smell. Your neighbors won't be happy. You won't be happy. So just keep those out. Any questions? The next slide is still step 2. But I kind of like to reiterate, if it grows, it goes. And also keeping a container on your countertop. It's usually not as smelly as you might think it might be. You can use any kind of container. IKEA has some that are actually for compost. And those are great. They clean up well. You can also, like I said, put them in a container that you have, any container that you already have. Like, I'm a fan of using what you have already. So you don't need to go out and buy a fancy $30, $40 countertop crock. So if you do, that's fine, but you don't have to. What I like to say is have like a bucket from, a hardware store with a lid on it that seals. Put your stuff in there, your countertop stuff every day, dump that into the 5-gallon bucket, and then when you're ready, you can take that out to the compost. Unless you want to walk out every day to your composter, that's fine too. But keep in mind, you need to add your dry ingredients along with your wet ingredients. So if you have a 5-gallon bucket, say you fill that halfway, you realize that you need to fill that, 1.5 times of browns to equal the amount of, what's in the 3-to-1 ratio. So that's a good way of kind of keeping track of what you're adding. Alternating wet and dry ingredients. I think of it as like lasagna, right? You're gonna layer, 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 layer. So you see in this picture, this person's putting in the green. It looks like a lot of green waste in there. I'm looking at that now. After you put your green waste, you're gonna wanna put your brown waste. So tip, have it ready to go. Have your bags of leaves, have your shredded paper, your cardboard already shredded up, and it can be a family event. Have the folks that you live with rip in cardboard, prepare it so that you can get ready to put it into the composter, or it's something nice, watching a show, ripping cardboard. There's something about ripping cardboard. No, but cardboard is great to add as a brown if you don't have leaves. Even if you do have leaves, but I know it's tough this time of year to find brown leaves. So clean a neighbor's yard up that might have some in the corner. I see them every once in a while. Those would be great, and especially in the fall when they put leaves out at the curb. There's a lot of leaf bags. So again, like maybe ask your neighbors to have some leaves from their lawn. Different ways of getting them, but definitely keep that in mind. Also, another tip: to use finished compost as a starter, especially if you're using a tumbler. We were talking about this earlier. because there's no, like, it inoculates the compost, so it'll add microorganisms into the compost bin. Today we used basically the soil that was around the garden into start a composter, and then we put the food scraps on top of that. Soil's fine. If you have, soil around your flower beds, or if you have a garden already, that's great too. You don't have to go and buy a compost starter. Just putting that out there, you can start this free without using a compost starter. Any questions? Three to one, that's the ratio. All right,
I
so.
do have a quick question.
Yeah.
On the brown compost, like, twigs and branches and that sort of thing.
Yes.
How small should you chop them up before putting them in?
That's a good question. So, I would say something like with a, no bigger than like a pencil or like a pen, as far as like the radius, but whatever fits in the composter is fine, but something like very small, radius wise, because it'll take a while. That's a good point. When you are starting, you could put twigs at the bottom of your composter. That'll help keep it aerated. So that's a good way to start a pile, is adding twigs. You can also use hay, straw, hay bales in the fall. What do you do with them? They're nice, they look pretty, but you can use them actually in your composter at the end of the season if you're using them for decoration. So that will help keep it aerated, and same with the twigs. A healthy compost pile, like I said, should have more carbon than nitrogen, 3 to 1 ratio. That's usually the solution for most things compost related. And you're going to, again, chop it into small bits, cover it with browns. Every time you put in your greens, you're going to put in your browns. You will inevitably attract, bugs. It'll smell like it. You definitely don't want to keep it uncovered. Now, if you're using a tumbler, that's a different story. But I will say, you still want to follow those ratios. It is like a recipe. You want to follow and make sure that the ratios are good. It'll be too soggy if you're not adding enough browns. If you're not turning it enough, it could smell. It won't break down as it should. The other thing is brown paper bags. They're great if you have a countertop. I sometimes just use a brown bag on my countertop. I know that sounds weird, but I'll put my scraps. I was just cleaning out the fridge the other day, and there were some things that we didn't use, which I was not happy about, but I'm like, all right, well, this is just going to go in the composter, so I grabbed the brown bag. The whole brown bag is compostable, and that'll add browns to your compost pile. So if you have those, you can use them for your compost pile as well. Even like I remember growing up, we used the brown paper bags for our lunch. They can be put into your countertop container, and it'll just dump right into your composter. So those are nice. And they're inexpensive to use. You can get them at the dollar store. Excuse me. Step 3. All right, we're moving along here. Turning your compost. So I do recommend that if you have a tumbler to turn it every 3 to 5 days. If you have an open compost pile or any of the other ones that I showed you, every 5 to 7 days is good. Now, you might have any of you heard like you should use a thermometer on your compost pile? Marianne. You can. It's not necessary. It should be, 131 degrees, 5 days. You test it every day, turn it, test it every day, for like 5 weeks, kind of testing it with the thermometer. But you don't have to. Your compost will still break down whether you test it or not with the thermometer. If you realize like, hey, like I'm not you know, there's still bits, you know, there's still hunks and pieces, like it's really not breaking down after, you know, a couple months. Like, okay, maybe you can try a thermometer, but if you're turning it and you're watering it and you're adding the ratios like we talked about, you know, you should be fine. There are even like moisture, I guess, instruments to test the moisture. Last year I was out in Nebraska, couldn't remember, for a week with the U.S. Compost Council, and we did this. We created our compost piles and we tested, you know, the temperatures, we tested the moisture. It was pretty cool to see, but you can actually, in the next slide we'll talk about moisture. You can do it yourself. You don't need all the fancy tools, but if you're, you know, getting really into it and you want to, you know, take it a step up, you can do that, but you don't need any of this to make compost. So, but turning your pile will allow oxygen, like we talked about. It needs oxygen. The microorganisms need oxygen to thrive. They need it. So turn it. Pitchfork is a great tool. There are compost turners. It's kind of, I wish I had a picture, I should put one on here. Just like swivel, it's pretty cool. Like if you have a big pile to kind of get inside there. And also you might notice, I don't know if you've seen this, like your compost pile steaming or looking like, yeah. That's great. It means that the microbes are doing their job. They're breaking down, you know, the organic material. So they're getting hot. That's why it'll heat up. So that's a good thing. All right, step 4, you're watering it. Talked about earlier, making sure that it was near a water source, hose, using a bucket, but it should, so we talked about like a moisture meter, it should feel like a wrung out sponge. So if you get your hands in there, put some gloves on and like feel it, it really should be wet. If it's not, you can add water. Like water and oxygen, you know, the microbes need water and oxygen. So it sounds like you might need to add water when you're saying it's dry. Try it.
As you're talking, I'm realizing my compost tumbler is in direct sun all day long. And so I think that's why it's so dry. I need to add more water to a shadier spot.
Oh, right, yeah, moving it too, so that way you don't have to. But yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, she was saying it's in direct sun, so that can impact it and create dry compost. So, any questions? I actually need a drink of water. All right. So after you've done all this work, you're going to be rewarded with something that is beautiful that you can use in your garden. And how do you know kind of if it's ready to use in your garden? There's a couple of ways you can tell. Finished compost should smell earthy. Some ways to tell if it's finished. There's a germination test, which is test quality, where you're going to add the compost in with your soil. So 1/2 inch on top, 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch on top, 30% mixed in with your soil. Put your seeds in there, something that'll sprout quickly, cucumbers, I guess radishes. If you put 20 seeds, you know, you should have 15 or more germinating. If not, then, you know, the quality that you want isn't there. You know, you only have a couple that are germinating. There's also a respiration test that tests maturity. Put the compost in a baggie, put it on your counter or your windowsill for 3 days, and open it up, and it should smell like dirt. It shouldn't smell like anything other. It shouldn't smell like food scraps, but it should just smell earthy. That's kind of a couple different ways to test. And if you don't think that it's done, you can take it out of your tumbler or your compost pile and sift it. So if you still see some pieces in there, there's ways to make a homemade sifter. You can do that, and then put the rest of the stuff back into the composter. That's one way to kind of use what you have. You can, you know, put it out kind of in a little pile on your lawn, and, finish it that way while you add some more stuff into your composter. So the other thing is, if you wanted to test your compost, Pennsylvania Extension, I believe they have, you can like send it away to the sample to have them test it if you were curious to see, like the quality of your compost. I mean, that's going a little much, but again, like it's available, and I wanted to tell you that you have these resources to be able to test it. So you pay for the test, and they'll tell you that what it's made of and things like that. So I think that's pretty cool.
How long does it take?
So it can take, with the tumbler, it could take a month. A tumbler, you can make compost pretty quickly, maybe even quicker than that. But it all depends on if you follow what this. It could take follow our recipe and follow like 3-to-1 ratio. It could take a couple months to 6 months. It could take a year. It just depends on how often you're turning it, what you're putting in there, how big the pieces are. But I mean, if you're following it, you could have compost. You start it now. You could have compost for the summer, the end of the summer, to be able to use in the fall. So a couple months. Again, like, keeping in mind, it's not completely, there's no like exact time frame. It really just depends on, again, like what you're putting in there, how often you're turning it, if you're keeping it damp. But yeah, with the tumbler, results are faster, but open outdoor composter, you'll see it break down at the bottom, and you can use from the bottom what you need to first, again, or you can get a separate composter and stop adding and then start in another one. But yeah, I mean, I know that's a horrible answer, but it's true. It's there's no exact science to say like it'll be, if you start today, it'll be done, in 6 weeks. But I definitely think that if you're following this, you should have compost by the fall. If you're by the end of the summer. So if you wanted to put it in your garden in the fall. So hopefully that's helpful. So yeah, it just depends. If you want to just keep it out of the landfill and just kind of put it in a pile and add your brown, it might take a year to break, to kind of break down. But if you're following, when you're turning it every week and you're, and you're putting it small pieces, then quicker. So you're adding big chunks of branches like that. Those things, things can change how fast it breaks down. So, but good question. Any other questions? Other questions? I'm happy to answer questions. Also, I will give you my email address. If you have any questions kind of after this, feel free to email me at any time. I always tell everyone who take my workshop, feel free to just reach out. If you have questions, you start composting tomorrow and you have a question pops up, just send me an email. It's back to Earth Compost, BACKTO, Earth Compost @gmail.com. And I will answer your questions. I could even come out, I can look at your composter, just, you know, give you my suggestions, my advice. If you want to, you can send me pictures, a video. But yeah, it's definitely something, I feel like you're well equipped to do this. So I'm super excited for all of you to get started, if you haven't already. I feel like there is a question.
Nope, I just put your email address.
Oh, good. Okay, so Mark put my email in there. Thank you.
Mhm.
I think I might even have it on the next slide, actually. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're on social media, so if any of you that are on Facebook and Instagram, we're on there. Feel free to follow us and engage and ask, you know, kind of questions that way, share. Appreciate your support. I'm so glad all of you are here and able to be a part of this tonight. This is great.
Any final questions from anyone on Zoom?
Well, I guess we're ready to go out and start doing it.
Good. That's what I like to hear. Like I said, just use me as a resource. If you have any questions, I'm here. It's good to know that you have kind of, I always felt like I don't know what I'm doing here and I don't know who to ask. Like you go online and there's so much information. There's a lot out there, so.
All right, well, thank you,
Thank
Colleen.
you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Have a good evening.